When I returned from my business trip, I was shocked to find the house empty. There was only a note left behind by my husband and my mother-in-law. It said, "Take care of that old woman. We went on vacation." As soon as I read it, I ran to my husband's grandmother's room and found her lying in bed nearly dying. Just as I was trying to rush her to the hospital, she opened her eyes and said, "Help me get my revenge. They have no idea who I really am." Shortly after, my husband and mother-in-law returned from their trip and screamed in terror at the scene in the house. Before we dive into this incredible story, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because we bring you jaw-dropping real-life stories like this every single day. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from, and don't forget to like this video if you want to see more stories like this. Today's special greeting goes to Mira Sanders from Boston, USA. Hello, Mira. We see you. Now let me tell you my story. The only sound breaking the stillness of that night was the rattle of my suitcase wheels on the rough concrete of the driveway. I, Thandie McKays, let out a long sigh, trying to shake off the exhaustion weighing down my shoulders. My body was aching and bruised after a 6-hour drive back from the neighboring province, feeling as though I was about to break. Even though this trip had been especially draining both physically and mentally, the thought of seeing my husband Saifo's face, expecting him to at least greet me with a glass of water or a small smile, was the tiny bit of strength keeping me going. My watch showed a little after 11 at night. The house, which was supposed to always have the porch light on, was submerged in total darkness, looking like an abandoned farmhouse. I fumbled in my pocket for the emergency key I always carried. It felt strange. My mother-in-law, Mambatha Nambula, who lived with us, would always scold me if I forgot to turn on the porch light for security reasons. But that night, an impenetrable shadow wrapped around the humble house. The click of the key turning in the lock echoed with a sharp metallic sound. Then the hinges of the door creaked as it opened. The stale air of a house that had not been ventilated all day stung my nose, mixed with a faint smell of dust. There was no smell of food, no noise from the television that Saifo usually left on at full volume. I didn't hear Mambatha's constant nagging either. I felt along the wall for the living room switch. The white light of the fluorescent bulb flickered several times before illuminating a messy room. The sofa cushions were tossed on the floor. Bags of potato chips were scattered on the coffee table, and a row of dirty mugs sat abandoned. I shook my head in silence. I was used to this scene. Since I was the one balancing a job with running the household, I often had to clean up the mess my husband and mother-in-law left behind. But the quiet of this night was different. I called out to my husband, my voice slightly trembling. No answer. I called for Mambatha, only silence. I walked toward the kitchen with heavy steps, hoping to find them eating dinner, or at least see some sign of life. The table was completely empty. There wasn't even a lid over a plate of food. There was only a sheet of white paper held down by a salt shaker, so it wouldn't blow away. My heart began to beat violently. I approached and picked up the paper. Saifo's messy handwriting was unmistakable. Beside it, in a stiffer, more formal script, was Mambatha's writing. As I read phrase by phrase, I felt my blood turn to ice. The message was brief but cutting. It was as if a dagger had been driven into my heart. They wrote that they needed a vacation to clear their heads. They had gone on a trip together and did not want to be disturbed, ordering me to take good care of the old woman in the back room. My legs grew weak, and I crumpled the paper in my fist. The tears I had been holding back threatened to overflow, but there was no time to cry. My mind went immediately to the only person mentioned in the letter, Gogo Zadwa, Saifo's grandmother. She had been paralyzed by a stroke and had been suffering from dementia for the last 3 years. If Saifo and Mambatha had been gone since the morning, it meant Gogo Zadwa had been alone in the house all day without food or water. My exhaustion instantly turned into panic. I dropped my bag on the floor and ran toward the back room where Mambatha had confined Gogo Zadwa. The door was shut tight. Upon opening it, a stench of urine and dampness hit my nose. The room was narrow, containing only an old cot and a creaky plastic dresser. Not a single window was open. On a thin yellowed mattress, a skeletal body lay weakly. Gogo Zadwa looked pitiful. Her eyes were closed, her mouth slightly agape, and she was breathing with great difficulty. Her wrinkled skin was dry, showing signs of severe dehydration. I knelt beside the cot and took her cold hand. I felt my heart breaking into pieces. How could anyone be so cruel to their own mother or grandmother? Saipho was her biological grandson, and Mombatha was her daughter-in-law. Yet, they treated this elderly woman worse than a stray animal. I immediately ran to the kitchen and returned with a glass of warm water and a spoon. With trembling hands, I gently lifted Gogo Zadwa's head and slowly slid a little water into her cracked lips. She coughed weakly, but then by reflex swallowed the water greedily. I continued giving her spoonfuls of water, crying in silence. Once her breathing stabilized a bit, I hurried to get a basin of warm water and a small towel. I cleaned her face and body, which were sticky with sweat and grime. Then I searched for clean clothes in the pile of Uniron laundry and changed her out of the foul-smelling rags. Tears kept falling down my cheeks, but I did everything with care. Guilt washed over me. I shouldn't have gone on that business trip. I should have known that leaving Gogo Zadwa with Saipho and Mombatha was a fatal decision. Although I was the one who cared for her, I had to work to earn money because Saipho refused to keep a steady job. I looked at the elderly face with deep pity, fixing her messy white hair. In that moment, I made a firm decision. It didn't matter if Saipho got angry. I was taking Gogo Zadwa to the hospital that very night. Her condition was too serious to be handled at home. I reached into my pocket for my phone to call a ride-share, but just as I tried to stand up, a hand, thin as a dry branch, but surprisingly strong, grabbed me by the wrist. I startled and turned around. I saw that Gogo Zadwa's eyes were wide open. They weren't the empty, confused eyes of a dementia patient. Her gaze was sharp, focused, and filled with total awareness. The look was so cold and deep, it seemed to emanate a hidden power. I stood frozen. The shock kept me from speaking. Gogo Zadwa, who until now had only muttered incomprehensible sounds, suddenly moved her lips. The voice that came out was no longer a weak murmur, but a firm and authoritative whisper. "Don't take me to the hospital," Gogo Zadwa said. She asked me to help her get revenge, saying that Saipho and Mombatha had no idea who she really was. A chill ran down my spine. In the middle of the quiet night, I felt like I was standing in front of a stranger, not the Gogo Zadwa I knew. Still paralyzed, I looked at her with disbelief, trying to understand what had just happened. Gogo Zadwa, diagnosed with severe dementia and paralysis by the neighborhood doctor, was now looking at me with the eyes of a hawk. The strength with which she held my wrist was incredible. It wasn't the strength of a dying old woman. I held my breath, trying to calm my racing heart. In a trembling voice, I asked if she was really conscious or if I was hallucinating from exhaustion, but Gogo Zadwa instead ordered me to lock the door and draw the curtains tight. Although her voice was harsh, the command was so absolute that I followed it by reflex without talking back. Once the door was locked, she pointed to a corner of the room. It was right under the old plastic dresser where I usually kept her clean clothes. With her breathing still heavy but regular, she instructed me to move the dresser and lift a floorboard that was a slightly different color. I hesitated for a moment, but her pressing gaze forced me to move. With the little strength I had left, I pushed the plastic dresser aside. Beneath it, a wooden floor covered in a thick layer of dust was revealed. I inspected the floor and found a slightly loose board. I lifted it using the tip of my house key. Lifting the board revealed a small space beneath the floor. It was a secret compartment I had no idea existed. Inside the hidden hollow was a small, ancient-looking wooden box with beautiful carvings. It contrasted sharply with the old furniture in the room. Gogo Zadwa gestured for me to bring the box to her. With trembling hands, I handed it over. She opened it with fingers that were still stiff, but determined. Inside were several small bottles containing a dark liquid and some pills that didn't look like common pharmacy medicine. Gogo Zadwa drank one of the liquids in one gulp without water, closed her eyes for a moment, and regulated her breathing. A few minutes passed in a suffocating silence. Slowly, color returned to her pale face. Her breathing became longer and calmer. When she opened her eyes again, she tried to sit up by herself. I tried to help her by reflex, but she raised her hand, indicating she could do it alone. Indeed, the elderly woman sat upright on the thin mattress. Her posture was completely different. It was no longer a weak, hunched back. She stared at me and sketched a faint smile, a smile of gratitude, but also of deep bitterness. She began to speak with clear diction and organized language, no longer using the mumbles of an incomprehensible dialect. She introduced herself again, not as the Gogo Zadwa with dementia, but as a woman in total control of her consciousness. She explained that the last 3 years of paralysis and dementia had been a great charade, a test she designed to see the true faces of her descendants. If you're enjoying this story so far, please take a moment to hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. We post stories like this every single day, so make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think is going to happen next. She said she had pretended to be weak and helpless, to know who cared for her sincerely, and who only wished for her death for the inheritance. Tears ran down my face as I listened to this confession. She continued speaking with growing indignation. She revealed that Saifo and Mambatha intentionally gave her very little food and often gave her rotten food when I wasn't home. Their goal was simple and cruel: to make her die slowly of malnutrition without leaving visible traces of violence, so they could quickly seize the deed to the house and other assets they believed she still had. I covered my mouth with my hand, choking back a sob. My heart shrank with pain. I felt betrayed. All that time, I had sent nearly 70% of my monthly salary to Saifo for Gogo's supposed expensive medications, special diets, and nutritious food. Saifo always said the cost of her care was exorbitant. It turned out that money never reached her. Saifo and his mother used the money I earned with my sweat for their own luxuries. Meanwhile, Gogo was starving in that stifling back room. My exhaustion and sadness gave way to a rage that began to burn in my chest. I felt stupid for having trusted my husband so easily. Gogo Zadwa saw the turmoil of emotions on my face, reached out and squeezed my shoulder firmly. She told me I had no reason to feel guilty. I was the only reason she was still alive and hadn't destroyed them all yet. I was the only sincere person. She asked me to help her stand up. I helped her and was surprised by how firmly her thin body held itself. She walked toward the wall where an old faded calendar poster was hanging. She felt a specific area behind the calendar and pressed a hidden spot. Behind the peeling wallpaper, a subtle mechanical noise was heard, as if a hydraulic system were moving. My eyes went wide as part of the bedroom wall slid slowly to one side. Behind the flimsy-looking wall was a small room that had nothing to do with the state of the old house. It was cool from automatic air conditioning, clean and filled with glowing monitor screens. It was a control room. I stepped in cautiously. My eyes scanned the secret room. The walls were filled with security camera feeds showing every corner of the house, the living room, the kitchen, and even the front yard. Even voice recording files were meticulously saved. Gogo Zadwa sat in a comfortable office chair in front of the monitors. The blue light from the screens illuminated her face, making her look like a war commander instead of a frail old lady. She turned to me and said in a terribly cold voice that we should see the truth together. She pressed a few buttons and the main screen played the recording from that very morning. Before Saifo and Mambatha left, I saw my husband and mother-in-law counting money while laughing. It was the money I had given them for that month's expenses. Gogo looked at me intently and said the real game had just begun. I remained motionless, standing in front of the large screens. The bluish light reflected on my tear-stained face, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of burning rage. Gogo Zadwa moved the mouse calmly and selected a video file from 2 weeks ago. It was the day I had gone to the corporate office for the monthly meeting. The screen showed the living room I cleaned daily. In the recording, Mambatha was sitting comfortably eating chips and watching TV. In contrast, Gogo Zadwa was sitting in a wheelchair in the corner of the room, staring out the window. Suddenly, Mambatha got up with a look of annoyance. She walked over to Gogo Zadwa and without warning kicked the wheels of the wheelchair hard, causing Gogo to shake violently. Mambatha's mouth was moving fast, spitting out horrible curses that were perfectly captured by the hidden high-sensitivity microphone. She cursed Gogo, calling her a useless burden who only wasted money. It even showed her spitting on Gogo's plate and forcing her to eat it. I covered my mouth, trying not to scream in horror at the cruelty of my mother-in-law, who always acted so kind in front of the neighbors. I felt a tightness in my chest, as if the oxygen in the room had run out. I never imagined that the woman I respected as my own mother was capable of doing something so horrific to a helpless elder. Gogo Zadwa said nothing. She pressed another button and the video changed. This time it was a recording from 3 days ago, just when I had left for my business trip. The video showed Saifo entering the house, but he wasn't alone. Following him was a young woman, elegantly dressed and heavily made up. I vaguely recognized her. It was Lindau, a childhood friend Saifo had introduced to me as a distant cousin. They were sitting very affectionately on the sofa in a way that was far too intimate for cousins. Saifo was smiling widely with his arm around Lindau's shoulder, a laugh I almost never heard when he was with me. Their conversation was heard clearly, and it tore my heart apart. Lindau asked Saifo when he was going to divorce his country bumpkin wife. Saifo lit a cigarette and replied calmly. He said he just had to hold out a little longer. He explained his plan clearly. He still needed me as a money-making machine. Saifo called me a stupid, submissive cow. He said that as soon as the old woman, Gogo Zadwa, died and the house inheritance was in his hands, he would immediately throw me out and marry Lindau. The two laughed out loud, imagining the luxury life they would have built on my suffering and Gogo's death. Lindau even asked if the medicine Saifo was putting in Gogo's drink was working. Saifo replied that the dose, slow but steady, would take her to the other world by the end of the week. My world collapsed in an instant. My legs could no longer support my body, and I slumped onto the cold carpet. All my sacrifices during 5 years of marriage seemed to have vanished. I had worked day and night, doing overtime until I got sick. I had avoided buying myself new clothes so I could buy Saifo designer shoes. Every effort to keep that house running had been to be treated like a cow. My love had been betrayed in the cruelest way. Saifo wasn't just a lazy husband. He was a monster who was murdering his own grandmother and planning his wife's ruin. The pain in my heart slowly transformed into a cold, hard block of ice. My sobs ceased. I brushed the tears from my cheeks. Gogo Zadwa turned her office chair to face me. She didn't offer sweet words of comfort, for she knew I didn't need pity. She asked me in a firm voice, "Have you seen enough evidence?" She asked if I was ready to stop being a victim and become an actress in this play. I lifted my head. My bloodshot eyes now shone with a new resolution. I stood up, smoothed my clothes, and looked Gogo Zadwa directly in the eye. In a firm voice and without the slightest hesitation, I replied that I was ready. I wasn't going to let them get away with it so easily. I was willing to do whatever she asked to make them pay for their evil deeds. Gogo smiled with satisfaction and reached out. I shook her wrinkled hand firmly. A silent agreement had been forged between the two most wounded women in that house. Suddenly, the doorbell connected to the secret room's intercom rang. Gogo looked at the wall clock. It was a little after midnight. She said the guest of honor had arrived. She pressed a button to open the front door remotely and asked me to receive the visitor and bring him there. I left Gogo's room and crossed the dark, silent living room toward the entrance. An elegant, shiny black sedan was parked in the narrow driveway. The sound of the engine was soft, almost inaudible. A middle-aged man, impeccably dressed in a suit, stepped out of the car. He carried an expensive-looking leather briefcase. Behind him, two burly men dressed in black got out and stood firmly on either side. I opened the door wide. The man in the suit bowed respectfully and asked politely, "Is Chairwoman Zadwa Makaizlamini inside?" I felt momentarily confused by the name Zadwa Makaizlamini, but quickly realized that was Gogo Zadwa's true name. I led them inside. The man in the suit walked confidently toward the back room as if he knew the layout of the house by heart. When he entered the secret room and saw Gogo Zadwa sitting upright in the chair, he immediately bowed low. It was a display of extreme deference. He introduced himself as Advocate Themba Nkobo, Gogo's personal attorney, and the head of the legal team for the massive conglomerate she owned. I was stunned. Gogo wasn't just a wealthy person. She was the head of a powerful empire. That night, in the small room behind the wall, a colossal plan began to take shape. Documents were exchanged, strategies were discussed, and the fates of Saifo and Mombatha were being rewritten by the hands they considered weak. At a luxury villa located on the side of a cool mountain, the sun shone brightly. Saifo was reclining on a sunbed by the private pool, enjoying a cold orange juice. He was wearing the latest fashion sunglasses he had just bought the day before with my secondary credit card. Beside him, Mombatha was busy uploading photos of the landscape and the gourmet food laid out on the table to her social media to brag to her friends at the social club about how well she lived. Lindai, who also accompanied them on the vacation, was laughing merrily while swimming. In fact, all those expenses had been paid with my sweat and tears. Their mood was at its peak. They felt like kings and queens. Saifo checked his phone every now and then, not to ask about his wife or grandmother, but to check the balance of the bank account he had secretly diverted. He thought he had one. In his mind, the old lady hadn't eaten or drunk in 2 days, so she would already be dying or dead, and his stupid wife, Thandi, would be in a panic, dealing with the body alone. Saifo smiled cunningly. He imagined how easy it would be to sell the house he would inherit. He had already contacted a real estate agent he knew, promising him a large commission. What he didn't know was that the title deed he had was actually a forgery that Gogo had swapped years ago. Meanwhile, hundreds of kilometers away from that villa, Saifo's house was full of activity, but not laughter. Since dawn, a large truck had been parked in front of the house. It wasn't Saifo's moving truck, but a truck to haul away his and Mombatha's junk. I worked quickly and efficiently, assisted by the team advocate Themba Onkobo had brought. We threw Mombatha's tacky clothes, Saifo's collection of smelly shoes, and all the cheap furniture they had bought into large black plastic bags. Those belongings wouldn't be stored. They would be donated or discarded, according to Gogo's instructions. I felt a strange sensation seeing the house I lived in slowly empty out, but the relief I felt was much greater. Every time I put one of Saifo's things into a plastic bag, I felt a great weight lifting off me. Advocate Themba Onkobo oversaw the process meticulously. He had also brought a team of interior designers who would completely transform the house in a short period of time. Gogo Zadwa, who had just finished bathing and was dressed in dignified loungewear, sat in a wheelchair, not out of paralysis, but to conserve energy. She gave instructions, wanting the house to return to how it was in her years of youth and power, and to be cleansed of every trace of her grandson's laziness. Advocate Themba Onkobo approached me with a thick folder. He explained the true situation of the property assets. It turned out the house and the surrounding land had been transferred long ago to Gogo's charitable foundation. Therefore, legally, neither Saifo nor Mombatha had any right to inherit the property. Even the car Saifo had taken on vacation was a long-term rental in the company's name, and Advocate Themba Onkobo had unilaterally cancelled the contract that morning. I listened carefully to the explanation. I admired Gogo's wisdom. She had foreseen and prepared for even the worst-case scenario with her family. As the afternoon progressed and the house was half empty, starting to be furnished with much more elegant new furniture from the warehouse of Gogo's company, I proceeded to execute the next phase of the plan. Gogo instructed me to send a message to Saifo. I typed the message on my phone with firm hands. The phrase was short and designed to provoke Saifo's nature. I wrote that Gogo hadn't been breathing for an hour, that her body was cold and stiff, and that I was too scared to be alone in the house. I asked what I should do and begged Saifo to come back soon. I pressed send and left the phone on the table. We waited patiently, and Gogo Zadwa also watched the phone screen. After 15 minutes, the phone vibrated. There was a reply from Saifo. I opened the message and read it out loud so Gogo and the attorney could hear. Saifo's response was something one wouldn't expect from a human being with a conscience. He wrote to me not to get nervous and not to make a scene by calling the neighbors. He ordered me to wrap Gogo's body in any cloth and leave it in the room. Saifo made an excuse saying his business matter wasn't finished yet and he could only return in 2 days. At the end of the message, Saifo added not to call again because the signal there was bad. Advocate Themba Onkobo shook his head, visibly disgusted by the content of the message. Gogo Zadwa simply snorted. Her expression was blank, but her eyes burned. For her, that message was the final nail in the coffin of Saifo's future. There was no longer any doubt about destroying her own grandson. I replied with a double-meaning phrase. I wrote, "All right, honey. I'll take care of everything here. See you then." I put the phone down. My face was now cold without a trace of sadness. I turned to advocate Themba Onkobo and nodded firmly. The transformation of the house continued even more aggressively. Dusty rugs were removed and replaced with thick, luxurious carpets. Old curtains were taken down and replaced with elegant silk ones. Dirty walls were repainted quickly with odorless, fast-drying paint. In less than 24 hours, the humble, dark, and gloomy house had been transformed into a luxury residence, emanating an aura of authority. This was no longer the house of Saipho, the unemployed. This was the temporary lodging of Chairwoman Zodwa Makaislamini, a tycoon who had risen from the dead. And in this house, the stage for the final judgment of Saipho and Mombatha was perfectly set. I looked at the front door, imagining my husband's look of astonishment later. I eagerly waited for that day to arrive. That morning, the sunlight streaming through the cracks in the windows felt different than usual. Normally, the light only revealed dust motes floating in the cluttered living room filled with Mombatha's useless junk. But today, the light illuminated a frantic and amazing activity that completely changed the atmosphere. Since the first truck arrived at dawn, the house seemed to have been invaded by an army of disciplined ants. Under the direction of the taciturn but extremely efficient advocate Themba Onkobo, dozens of workers in neat uniforms moved quickly and quietly. They weren't just cleaning, they were erasing traces. The footprints of Saipho's laziness, the marks of Mombatha's greed, and the traces of pain that had clung to the walls for years were being torn out by the roots. I stood in a corner of the room, watching as the old sofa with the stuffing coming out, the place where Saipho smoked and loafed all day, was lifted by two burly workers and loaded onto the trash truck. A strange satisfaction spread through my chest at the sight of that object disappearing. The sofa was a silent witness to how often I had been scolded for being slow to bring coffee, and how often I had seen my husband sleeping soundly when I had to go to work early. After the sofa, it was the turn of the tacky bookshelf full of Mombatha's fake porcelain. She took great pride in that piece of furniture. Although the contents were just cheap imitations, she often bragged to guests. Once the bookshelf was taken away, I felt the living room had suddenly doubled in size. It was as if the house had been suffocating from visual trash for a long time and was finally breathing. Along with the physical transformation of the house, an even more surprising change was taking place in the back room. Gogo Zodwa, known by the neighbors as a smelly and pitiful old woman, was undergoing a stunning metamorphosis. Advocate Themba Onkobo had hired a personal stylist and a costume designer who only worked for high society. Now in the clean room, smelling of freshly installed lavender, Gogo Zodwa sat in front of a large new mirror. I almost didn't recognize her. Her white hair, which used to be a mess, was now styled in a modern, elegant, and orderly fashion. This revealed the line of her neck, where some of her youthful beauty still remained. Her wrinkled face had been contoured with subtle but strong makeup, covering the paleness of her illness and accentuating her majestic jawline. She was no longer wearing the old nightgown full of food stains. Her body was now covered in a modern silk suit of the highest quality. The dark color of the dress gave her an air of elegance. An emerald green ring shone intensely on her ring finger, matching the brooch on her chest. These weren't Mombatha's imitation jewels. These were real gems that could be worth the price of 10 houses in that neighborhood. When she stood up and looked in the mirror, her posture was perfectly upright. The old wooden cane was discarded and replaced by a silver cane with a carved lion's head. It looked more like a power accessory than a walking aid. I looked at her with respect and awe. What I had before me was no longer Gogo Zodwa. It was the true queen of business, Chairwoman Zodwa Makaislamini. In the afternoon, after the house was redecorated with luxury minimalist furniture brought directly from the chairwoman's private warehouse, I was called to the living room. On the gleaming black marble table, several important documents prepared by Advocate Themba Onkobo had been spread out. I sat across from Gogo and the lawyer. Advocate Themba Onkobo handed me a gold pen. The first document was the divorce petition. I couldn't hide the trembling sensation as I read the title. For years, the word divorce had been a terrifying nightmare for me. It was something shameful that my family had drilled into me I had to endure. But today, remembering Saipho's cruelty, the document seemed to be my ticket to freedom. I took a deep breath and steadied myself. Then I signed my name. My handwriting was firm without the slightest hint of doubt. The second document was much thicker. It was the power of attorney and transfer documentation for the management of the Dlamini Empowerment Foundation. Gogo explained that she was too old to handle the detailed operations and needed someone with a heart of gold and absolute honesty to continue her legacy. She didn't trust her own children or grandchildren, but she trusted me. I politely declined, feeling inadequate for such a large responsibility. But Gogo firmly took my hand, her gaze softened, filled with deep trust. She said, "Intelligence can be learned, but a true heart is a rare gift." I finally nodded and signed the documents. At that moment, my identity changed. I was no longer a daughter-in-law who could be stepped on. I was the confidant of one of the country's biggest tycoons. By nightfall, the final stage preparation was concluded. The house now looked like a five-star hotel lobby, abstract and artistic paintings hung on the walls, and a beautiful crystal chandelier hung from the living room ceiling. Where there had once been broken ceramic floor tiles, there was now a thick, soft Persian rug. All my personal belongings had been moved to the guest room, which had been transformed into a luxurious master bedroom. In contrast, the rooms Saifo and Mombatha used were empty. It was as if to emphasize they no longer had a place in that house. The workers had already left, and a different kind of silence remained. It was a silence full of expectation, like the calm before a great storm. When night enveloped the neighborhood, I turned off all the main lights, plunging the house into deep darkness. Only the indicator lights of the electronics flickered dimly. According to the plan, we had to make Saifo and his entourage think the house was still in mourning or empty. I sat on a single sofa next to Gogo Zadwa, who sat silently in a sumptuous armchair in the center of the living room. In the darkness, I could hear the loud beating of my own heart, not out of fear, but because of the adrenaline pumping. I imagined the faces of Saifo, Mombatha, and Lindio when they walked in. I imagined their arrogance crumbling. Advocate Themba Nkobo and the two burly personal bodyguards, Mandla and Spoo, stood like statues in the dark corners of the room. They were almost invisible, but their presence gave me an enormous sense of security. Gogo Zadwa whispered to me, reminding me to stay calm and act as we had practiced. Her voice was very cold and cutting like a scalpel. She said that tonight would be the most valuable lesson for her ungrateful grandson, a lesson they would never forget in their lives. I nodded in the darkness, squeezing my sweaty hands, trying to draw courage from the figure of the old woman beside me. Outside, the chirping of crickets echoed, accompanying our wait. Time seemed to pass very slowly. Every moment was painful and exciting at the same time. I took a deep breath, reaffirming myself with the scent of expensive perfume that now filled the house. I was ready to receive the uninvited guests. I was ready to put an end to my own suffering that night. When the clock hands hit 10 at night, the familiar sound of a car engine approaching was heard. It was the SUV Saifo had rented. The engine sound was a bit rough because Saifo was a driver who didn't know how to take care of vehicles. The car stopped right in front of the front door. The headlights cut through the darkness of the yard, sweeping the front wall of the house, which was now painted in elegant gray. But Saifo and his companion seemed too tired or not smart enough to notice the color change in the middle of the night. The loud thud of the car doors closing was heard, followed by laughter that broke the night stillness. Sitting in the dark living room, I sharpened my hearing. I could hear Mombatha's shrill voice complaining. She complained about how exhausting the drive back had been because of traffic and how hungry she was. She shouted at Saifo to open the door quickly, because she wanted to shower and eat. Then I heard Lindio's whiny voice chiming in that her feet hurt from wearing heels all day. Lindio asked in a mocking tone, "The old lady is really dead, right? I don't want to see a corpse when I walk in." Saifo laughed. His laugh sounded very irritating to me. He assured his mistress that even if she wasn't dead, she would probably be dying and they would just toss her at the county hospital. They approached the front door. The sound of their steps dragging shopping bags and suitcases sounded heavy. I felt Gogo Zadwa's hand give my arm a light tap. It was the signal to get ready. The lock turned noisily. Saifo seemed to have trouble inserting the key due to his impatience. Finally, the door burst open. The night wind blew in, bringing with it the stale sweat smell of the three who had just returned from their vacation. They walked into the completely dark living room. Saifo felt along the wall for the light switch. In the place where it had always been, he complained that I hadn't turned on the porch light and insulted me, calling me stupid for not being able to do even simple household chores correctly. "Dandy, where are you? Turn on the light." "I'm starving," Saifo shouted with an arrogant tone. No answer, only the echo of his own voice bouncing off the wall. Mombatha also shouted my name, accusing her daughter-in-law of sleeping lazily. Lindao complained that the house felt very creepy and that it smelled too much like perfume for a house with a dead person. Saifo finally found the light switch. Without hesitation, he clicked the button. The crystal chandelier in the center of the room turned on instantly, filling the entire space with a bright, warm golden light. The light revealed everything in an instant. The scene that unfolded before their eyes was too shocking, surreal, and horrible for their sinful souls. That's why their first reaction was to freeze before screaming. Ai. Mombatha screamed hysterically, clutching her chest. Her eyes were wide, almost bulging out of their sockets. Lindao shrieked and stepped back, bumping into Saifo and causing them both to nearly fall. Saifo stood with his mouth open. His face turned as pale as if a ghost had sucked all his blood. Their screams weren't because they saw a ghost or a rotting corpse. On the contrary, they screamed in terror at the unfamiliar luxury and the figure that should have been weak and helpless, who now looked like a majestic, grim reaper. Before them, the space they had left dirty and messy had been transformed into a small palace. There was no longer an old sofa or dust. Everything sparkled, was clean, and looked expensive. But what almost stopped their hearts was the scene in the center of the room. There sat Gogo Zadwa in an antique high-backed European armchair covered in red velvet. The woman they had left to die without a drop of water was now sitting with her legs elegantly crossed. Her gaze was piercing and her lips showed a chilling sneer. In her right hand she held a fine porcelain cup from which aromatic tea steam rose. To her left and right, two bodyguards dressed in black suits, tall as giants, stood. They had their arms crossed over their chests with a threatening and expressionless look. And beside Gogo Zadwa was me. The wife who used to receive them in an old nightgown now looked completely different. I wore a long cream-colored dress that fell beautifully over my body, matching a neatly styled look. My face was clean and full of life. And what terrified Saifo the most was that my face was cold. There was no welcoming smile, no fear, no submission. I looked at the three of them as if they were dirt stuck to my shoes. "It's a ghost. It's a ghost," Mombatha screamed, pointing at Gogo Zadwa with a trembling finger. She collapsed to the floor, not caring about the shopping bags that fell. Lindao hid behind Saifo, grabbing his clothes tightly. Saifo tried to regain his senses, rubbing his eyes several times, wishing it were a nightmare or an exhaustion-induced hallucination, but the scent of jasmine and the cool air-conditioned air on his skin confirmed it was reality. Gogo Zadwa slowly lowered the teacup onto the marble table. The sound was quiet, but echoed loudly in the suffocating silence. She looked at Mombatha on the floor. "If I were a ghost, Mombatha, I would have dragged you to hell the moment you crossed this door." Her voice was heavy and majestic. It didn't sound at all like the dementia-stricken voice they were used to hearing. Saifo dared to speak, though his voice was stuttering and shaky. Gogo, what is all this? Why is the house like this? Where did you get this money?" Saifo turned to me, looking for a scapegoat. "Dandy, what have you done? Did you sell the land behind my back? Who did you collude with to do this?" Saifo tried to shout to hide his fear. It was his old trick to intimidate his wife, but this time the shout didn't work. I didn't lower my head in fear. Instead, I stepped forward and looked my husband directly in the eye. "Shut up, Saifo," I said in a quiet but firm voice. "Don't you dare raise your voice in front of the owner of this house." "Owner?" Saifo was confused. He looked at the luxury furniture, the bodyguards, and finally his gaze rested on Advocate Themba Nkobo, who stepped out from the darkness of the corner with a folder. Advocate Themba Nkobo adjusted his glasses and looked at Saifo with contempt. "Good evening, Mr. Saifo and Mombatha," he said calmly. "I am Advocate Themba Nkobo, head of the legal team for the Dlamini Holdings Group and legal representative for Chairwoman Zadwa Makais Dlamini, whom you call Gogo Zadwa." She is the rightful owner of all the assets you have enjoyed, and also the owner of the company where Mr. Saifo worked as a logistics clerk. Silence. The silence took over the atmosphere. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Saifo's jaw dropped. Mombatha's eyes opened so wide the red veins were visible. Lindao slowly let go of the clothes she was grabbing. Their shallow minds couldn't process this giant information. The old lady they had tortured, fed with scraps, and wished death upon was the chairwoman of a conglomerate, their source of money and a tycoon. Mother, Mombatha stuttered, and tears of horror began to pool in her eyes. Mother, we thought you were going to die. We just wanted a little vacation. Gogo Zadwa laughed. A dry, humorless laugh. She rose from the chair, leaning on her silver cane, and walked slowly toward her daughter-in-law, who was slumped on the floor. It's a pity, Mombatha. Gogo leaned toward Mombatha's terrified face and whispered, "It seems even death felt disgusted by your actions. That's why it sent me back here to clean the trash out of my house. And tonight, that cleaning begins." Before we continue with what happened next, if you're enjoying this story, please hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell. We post amazing stories like this every single day, and you don't want to miss out. Also, drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our viewers around the world. The tension in the living room was palpable, as if the air had been compressed, making everyone's breathing heavy. Saifo was motionless, his face flushed with an explosion of rage, shame, and fear that had replaced his paleness. Gogo Zadwa's confession that she owned everything shattered Saifo's male pride. Saifo had always boasted about being the head of the household, the sole heir, and a success story working at a big corporation. But with one brief phrase from the old woman sitting in front of him, his whole illusion of success was ruthlessly torn down. He felt stripped and naked of all his false pride in front of his wife, whom he had always despised. Saifo gathered the little courage he had left. He thought he shouldn't lose his composure. His cunning mind tried to find a logical loophole. He pointed at Advocate Themba Nkobo with a trembling index finger, then at Gogo. His voice rose, trying to dominate the situation, as he usually did with me. Saifo shouted that it was all a fraud. He accused me of manipulating his grandmother, who had dementia, to make her sign fake documents. Saifo insisted that Gogo Zadwa was just an ordinary retiree living on her husband's pension, and that she couldn't own the large corporation he worked for. He threatened to call the police to report the attorney for forgery and elderly kidnapping. Gogo Zadwa didn't respond. She simply sipped her tea quietly. Her sharp eyes watched her grandson's behavior like a scientist watching a frightened lab rat. It was Advocate Themba Nkobo who stepped forward calmly, opened the leather folder he held, and took out a thick document with the official logo of the Dlamini Holdings Group. In a professional and serene tone, he began to read the facts that had been hidden. He explained that the reason Saifo had been able to work as a senior clerk in the logistics team wasn't due to his mediocre performance or genius. That position had been granted 5 years ago by direct instruction from Chairwoman Zadwa Dlamini, the majority shareholder, so that her grandson could have a job and support his family. Saifo stood with his mouth open, unable to say a word. That truth hit him harder than a physical slap. He remembered how proud he was when he was hired and how often he bragged to me about being a key player in the company. It turned out he was just an insider hire. He was just a parasite clinging to the big tree, thanks to his grandmother's compassion. Lindao, standing behind Saifo, began to realize the truth of the situation. Her expert eye for judging wealth began to detect the danger signals. Seeing the chairwoman, the bodyguards, and the luxury of the room, she realized Saifo was just an insignificant pawn with no value. Her hand, which had been clutching Saifo's arm, let go slowly but completely. She took a step back, trying to put distance between herself and the sinking ship. I watched Lindao's movement out of the corner of my eye. I felt deep disgust seeing how fragile loyalty built on a material basis was. I looked at Saifo, who was still trying to deny it. I spoke in a soft but stinging voice. I asked Saifo if he remembered the year-end bonus he used to buy Lindao a car last month. I informed him that the bonus was actually a small dividend from the foundation shares that should have gone to Gogo's account, but that Saifo had embezzled by forging a signature. Saifo's face turned even paler. One by one, his crimes were being exposed. Suddenly, the silence of the room was interrupted by the continuous sound of phone notifications. The sound came from Saifo's pants pocket. Ding, 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 ding. The sound that used to delight him when messages from his friends arrived now sounded like a death bell. Saifo reached into his pocket with trembling fingers and pulled out his smartphone. The screen lit up, showing a series of emails and text messages that had arrived simultaneously. Saifo read the first notification. It was an official email from his company's Human Resources Department. The title was in bold and caps. Notice of disciplinary dismissal. Saifo's heart stopped. He opened the email. The content specified that Mr. Saifo had been fired with immediate effect due to evidence of company fund embezzlement and a serious breach of the ethical code. All company benefits like the car, laptop, and health insurance were withdrawn from that moment. Before Saifo could process the news, another notification appeared on his banking app. A text message from the bank informed him that his main account, savings account, and credit cards had been frozen at the request of legal authorities in connection with charges of money laundering and embezzlement. Saifo tried to open the mobile banking app with sweaty fingers. He failed. Access denied. He tried again, still denied. Balance 0 rands. Access blocked. In an instant, Saifo, who thought he was rich, became a beggar without a single rand to spend. Mombatha, seeing her son's face turned ghostly, also panicked. She snatched the phone from Saifo and read the screen. Her eyes opened in horror, and a scream choked in her throat. Her wealth, the money she adored, and that was her god, had vanished in an instant. Without money, Mombatha felt insignificant. She looked at Gogo Zadwa with pleading eyes, seeking a bit of compassion. But the chairwoman's gaze was as cold as Arctic ice. She said she was only taking back what was hers. She had let the mice nibble at her barn for a long time, and it was time to lock the barn. Lindau, now certain that Saifo was completely ruined and had no future, looked for a way to escape. She turned toward the exit, trying to slip away silently while everyone's attention was on Saifo. But her steps stopped when one of the burly bodyguards, Mandla, moved and blocked the exit with his muscular chest. Lindau looked up, terrified. I spoke from behind. I told Lindau not to rush, that the show wasn't over yet. I said Lindau was also part of this happy family and should share the consequences. Lindau was cornered, her face pale. She realized she was in much bigger trouble than simple adultery. Saifo fell to his knees on the luxury rug. His legs could no longer support his strengthless body. The phone fell from his hand and hit the floor. He stared ahead, not understanding. His world had collapsed in a single night. Without a job, without money, without a car, without a house, all his pride had vanished. In front of him, I stood upright, beautiful and dignified. The woman he considered weak now held his fate completely in her hands. Karma didn't arrive slowly. It came like a tsunami that washed away every bit of arrogance that once existed. The atmosphere of the living room now became a stage for a sad drama. Saifo, who had lost everything, remained kneeling on the floor with his head down. Beside him, Mombatha began to sob. These weren't tears of sincere regret, but tears of panic over imminent poverty and suffering. Mombatha crawled to Gogo Zadwa's feet, trying to touch the edge of her elegant silk suit. She pleaded for forgiveness with incoherent words, mentioning blood ties and Saifo's childhood memories. She made excuses, saying she had made a mistake, that she had just been carried away by emotions, and that Lindau had incited him to commit evil acts. Mother, please. Saifo is your favorite grandson. Don't do this. Mother, where are we going to live? Don't throw us out. Mombatha pleaded, shedding crocodile tears that smeared her makeup. Gogo Zadwa pulled her leg back, avoiding Mombatha's touch as if her hand transmitted a plague. Her face showed no emotion, only deep disgust. She said in a quiet but penetrating voice, "Where was that family love when you tried to starve me 2 days ago? Where was that love when you kicked my wheelchair?" The chairwoman stated she did not have a daughter-in-law named Nambula or a grandson named Saifo. They had died to her the moment they decided to kill her slowly. Suddenly, Saifo lifted his head. His eyes were red and full of madness. He turned toward Lindau, who was trembling in a corner, watched by bodyguard Spoo. Desperate, Saifo began to look for a scapegoat to save himself. He pointed at Lindio and shouted that the whole idea had been that woman's. Saifo made excuses, saying Lindio had incited him to keep the inheritance, that she told him not to give food to Gogo, and that she had poisoned his mind. Saifo tried to shift the responsibility, hoping Gogo would soften if he blamed an outsider. It's all that woman's fault, Gogo. She seduced me. She told me to be mean to you. I really love you, Saifo shouted shamelessly. Lindio stood with her eyes wide open as she heard the accusation, her fear transformed into a defensive rage. She didn't want to go to jail alone or be punished because of this bankrupt loser. Lindio screamed back, countering Saifo's accusation by exposing an even bigger secret. She shouted that Saifo was a huge liar. Lindio revealed that Saifo and Mombatha had planned everything from the start. She even exposed the darkest secret they had been meticulously hiding. Liar. Don't trust him, Chairwoman. Lindio screamed hysterically, pointing at Saifo and Mombatha. Those two bought illegal drugs. They put high-dose sedatives in your tea every morning, so you would sleep and get weaker. I only went with them on vacation. They are the killers. They tried to kill you slowly with a drug overdose, so it would look like you died of natural causes. Lindau's confession exploded like a bomb in the room. I was shocked. I knew they were bad, but I never imagined they would be so cruel as to give poison or illegal drugs to an elderly woman. Gogo Zadwa's face hardened. Her jaw was clenched, holding back growing indignation. Advocate Themba Onkobo, who until now had been quiet, nodded and gave a signal. That's enough. Advocate Themba Onkobo's voice cut through the uproar. He raised his hand. The confession has been recorded. We have also secured CCTV evidence regarding the administration of drugs. This is more than enough. Advocate Themba Onkobo pressed a button on his phone. The side door connecting the living room to the garage opened. 3 police officers in immaculate uniform stepped in with firm steps. It turned out they had been waiting there, listening to the whole conversation as direct witnesses. Saifo and Mombatha's faces immediately turned white, as if the blood had drained from their bodies. They didn't expect this to be a simple family judgment, but a real legal trial. The police acted immediately and quickly. An officer read Saifo and Mombatha their rights. The charges applied were very complex. Attempted murder for the purpose of asset appropriation, elder neglect, embezzlement of a large sum of company money, and illegal drug abuse. The policeman pulled out metal handcuffs that gleamed coldly under the crystal chandelier. The click of the handcuffs closing on Saifo's wrists was heard very painfully. Saifo tried to resist, struggling like a madman. He shouted that this was his house, his grandfather's inheritance, and that the police had no right to arrest him. But the police easily controlled him and pushed him against the wall. Mombatha threw herself on the floor, rolling and screaming hysterically, refusing to be handcuffed. She was like a child having a tantrum. But this time, no one comforted her. A female police officer lifted her firmly and put the handcuffs on. Lindio couldn't escape either, although she became a key witness who revealed the crime. She was arrested as an accomplice for knowing about the crime, not preventing it, and enjoying its results. Lindio sobbed. Her smeared makeup made her look like a sad clown. I watched the scene with mixed emotions. There was an immense relief, but also the bitterness of seeing the destruction of the family I once wished would be my paradise. I walked toward the pile of shopping bags and suitcases Saifo and Mombatha had brought. There was also a large black plastic bag with their dirty laundry from the vacation. I picked up the trash bag. I approached Saifo, who was helpless in the hands of the police. With a cold and expressionless look, I threw the bag of dirty clothes directly at Saifo's face. The bag hit Saifo's face, making him stumble back. "Take this trash with you and leave," I said in a low but firm voice. "Don't leave anything in my house. From this moment on, you are nothing. Not a husband, not a mother-in-law, not family. You are just strangers who stayed here temporarily." Saifo looked at me with eyes full of hate and despair. He tried to spit at me, but one of Gogo's personal bodyguards, Mandla, quickly hit Saifo's face, turning his head. The police took the 3 out of the luxury house. Mombatha's screams and curses echoed until they were put into the patrol car with flashing lights. I stood in the doorway, watching the convoy of police cars pull away, taking my past with them. I took a deep breath, inhaling the night air that now felt much fresher and cleaner. The heavy load that had weighed on my heart for 5 years had vanished in an instant. Behind me, Gogo Zadwa, Chairwoman Zadwa Makaislamini, remained seated on her throne, sipping her cold tea. The elderly woman sketched a faint smile, a smile of victory. Justice had been served in her own living room. That night, the big house became silent again. But it wasn't a chilling silence. It was a peaceful stillness. It was the beginning of a new life for me and the old queen. Time passed slowly and painfully for those who had fallen from the ivory tower. 3 months had passed since the shocking raid on Gogo Zadwa's luxury house. The legal process against Saifo and Mombatha was carried out with great severity. Thanks to the competent team of lawyers led by Advocate Themba Nkobo and the irrefutable evidence I presented, both were caught in multiple serious charges. But before the prison sentence was handed down, they had to go through a period of probation with the obligation to report regularly to the probation department. Because of administrative reasons regarding overcrowding in jails, they weren't put behind bars at that moment. But the life they lived outside prison was much more horrific than any hell they could imagine. Without a rand of money, without a home to stay in, and without a means of transport, Saifo and Mombatha became completely homeless in the city where they lived. Mombatha's social club friends who once praised her fake designer bags now blocked her phone number. The distant relatives Saifo used to brag to about his false success now closed their doors, fearing being implicated in the embezzlement case. Lindayo, the mistress who became the key witness and whistleblower, escaped a severe prison sentence, but her life was shattered. Her face made the local news as the accomplice mistress in an attempted murder. She was fired from her job, evicted from her rental apartment, and had now disappeared somewhere with the shame that would haunt her for life. That afternoon, the sun was very scorching, burning the asphalt road, and a mirage rose in the air. Under the eaves of a closed electronics store on a busy avenue, 2 people were huddled on old cardboard. They were Saifo and Mombatha. Their appearance was completely different from 3 months ago. Saifo, who used to wear impeccable shirts and smell like expensive cologne, now wore an old t-shirt with holes under the armpits and jeans stained with mud and dirt. His hair was disheveled, his face covered by a rough, unshaven beard, and his skin was sunburned and weathered. Mombatha beside him looked even more pitiful. The woman who once couldn't live without thick makeup and red lipstick now looked old and withered. Her hair, which was starting to gray, was a mess, and her face was dirty with street dust and covered in deep wrinkles. The clothes she wore were the only ones she had. They smelled stale from days of sleeping on the street. The 2 stared at the congested traffic. Their stomachs rumbled loudly, begging for food. Since the morning, they hadn't eaten anything but tap water from a nearby fountain. Hunger was no longer just an annoyance. It was a pain that twisted their insides and made their heads spin. The conflict between mother and son broke out over a trivial matter. Saifo saw the remains of a lunchbox that a passerby had just thrown into a nearby trash can. Shameless now, Saifo's survival instinct took over. He ran with small steps and rummaged through the trash, finding a half portion of pap with gravy and chicken bones that still had some meat on them. Saifo immediately took the treasure back to his cardboard, but Mombatha, who was also starving, saw it with wild eyes and snatched the lunchbox from Saifo's hands. A shameful fight broke out on the street. Saifo tried to recover the remaining pap from his mother's hands. They tugged back and forth, insulting each other cruelly, something a mother and son should never do. Mombatha screamed that she had given birth to him and had the right to eat first. Saifo screamed that all this karma had come to them because of his greedy mother, who told him not to feed Gogo. The lunchbox broke. The contents scattered across the dirty, dusty pavement. Now both stared at the pap mixed with sand in silence. Mombatha sobbed and feebly hit Saifo's chest. Saifo pushed his mother, causing her to fall. He grabbed his head in frustration. His dignity no longer existed. They had become the mockery of passers-by. Some people even recorded them with their phones, laughing with scorn. They recognized them as the family that had gone viral on social media for being ungrateful to their grandmother. Saifo covered his face in shame. The heat in his cheeks wasn't from the sun. but from the humiliation of being exposed in public. In the midst of that desperation, a shiny, gleaming black sedan slowly approached through the congested traffic in front of them. The car looked very elegant, contrasting with the dust and misery where Saipho stood. The rear window of the car rolled down slowly. Through the crack, the face of a very beautiful young woman appeared. She wore a soft pastel satin headscarf. Her face shone clean, radiating an aura of serenity and success. It was me, Thandi. Saipho's eyes went wide. Time seemed to stop for him. He recognized his wife, or rather his ex-wife, as the divorce had already been finalized by the court. I looked so peaceful and dignified inside the air-conditioned car. In my lap was a tablet showing that I was now a busy businesswoman handling important matters, not the woman who washed Saipho's dirty laundry. Our gazes met for a few seconds. Saipho expected to see anger or mockery in my eyes, but what he saw was much more painful, an expressionless look. I looked at him without emotion, as if he were part of the street scenery, as insignificant as a lamppost or a trash can. Driven by regret and the desire to return to his comfortable life, Saipho stood up and ran after the car. He ignored his mother, who was still crying on the pavement. He shouted my name with a hoarse voice. He pleaded, apologized, promised to change, and asked for a second chance. He ran, stumbling alongside the slowly moving car. His hand tried to grab the car door handle, but I didn't move. I didn't turn my head or signal the driver to stop. With an elegant and serene gesture, I pressed the window button. The window rolled up slowly, blocking Saipho's access to my world. Saipho hit the window with his face covered in tears and snot, begging for mercy. But the window closed tight. The soundproofing now separated the two worlds which were as different as heaven and earth. The luxury car accelerated, leaving Saipho breathless and slumped on the hot asphalt. The exhaust smoke gave him a light hit in the face like a final goodbye. Saipho remained lying on the street, sobbing and lamenting his own stupidity. He had thrown away the diamond and clung to the corpse, and now he had to eat the corpse alone. The karma arrived in the most poetic and painful way. He felt what it was like to be ignored, to starve, and to be treated as if he didn't exist. Exactly what he had done to Gogo Zadwa. 1 year later, in a quiet courtroom, the judge's gavel finally hit hard, marking the end of the legal battle for Saipho and Mombatha. The sentence imposed was heavy and relentless. The judge ruled it had been clearly and irrefutably proven that they were guilty of attempted murder for the purpose of asset appropriation and elder neglect, causing grave physical and mental suffering. Saipho was sentenced to 12 years in prison. On the other hand, Mombatha received a 10-year sentence. No tears could change the decision. After their assets were confiscated by the state and returned to the foundation, no one wanted to defend them for free. Life in prison became the beginning of a new suffering for them. Saipho, who had always been pampered and had never done a hard day's work, was now the object of bullying in the narrow, stifling cell. He was assigned to a cell with violent, big, and rough criminals. There, Saipho's social status as a former corporate employee meant nothing. He was forced to be the servant of the other inmates. Every morning, Saipho had to wake up first to scrub the dirty, smelly floor of the prison's shared bathroom without gloves. He had to wash his cellmates' clothes, massage their feet, and give up his food ration if the cell boss asked for it. Saipho's body was now skeletal. His cheekbones protruded, and his eyes were sunken and lifeless. Every time he scrubbed the dirty bathroom floor, he thought of me. Before I cleaned the bathroom in his house, washed his dirty clothes, and prepared his meals, Saipho realized now how hard that work was and how evil he had been to complain that it wasn't clean enough and never say thank you. Now he missed my scoldings. He missed my food and the warm house he had betrayed. That regret haunted him every night, becoming his mattress on the cold cement. In the women's prison, Mombatha's fate was no better. Her demanding and arrogant character made her hateful to her fellow inmates. On the first day, she ordered another inmate to bring her water as if she were a servant. As a result, she was beaten and marginalized. Now, Mombatha, whose pride was once so high, had to work in the prison's communal kitchen. Her fingers were full of blisters and calluses from peeling thousands of onions and potatoes every day. Her back, which had never carried weight, was now hunched from lifting sacks of rice and mayalai meal. Her face, which had always been cared for with expensive treatments, was now full of sunspots and deep wrinkles. The greatest irony of her life happened here. The woman who once treated Gogo Zadwa like useless trash was now being treated worse than trash by her environment. Meanwhile, outside the dark prison walls, my life and Gogo Zadwa's life were full of beauty and blessings. I was officially named CEO of the Dlamini Empowerment Foundation. The Dlamini Empowerment Foundation was the vast charitable organization owned by Gogo, focused on helping abandoned elders and providing scholarships to low-income children. I didn't limit myself to sitting behind a desk. I went into the field. Thanks to my intellect and sincere heart, the foundation grew rapidly. I became an inspiring woman respected by many. I gave lectures with confidence on women's empowerment and elderly care at various seminars. My appearance became more elegant and dignified, but my humility never changed. I was still the kind and smiling Thandi. Gogo Zadwa, Chairwoman Zadwa Makais Dlamini, enjoyed her old age in full happiness. Her health had recovered miraculously thanks to the best medical care and above all my sincere love. She no longer used a wheelchair. She could walk slowly through the garden of her beautiful house with a cane. Every morning we ate breakfast together on the back terrace, overlooking the koi pond. There was no longer tension or fear of being poisoned. The house was now filled with laughter and warm discussions about the foundation's future. That afternoon, the sky was a golden orange. Gogo and I were sitting on the garden bench enjoying hot rooibos tea and a cake I had baked. It was one thing I still wanted to do myself. Despite having many domestic employees, Gogo looked at my face with eyes full of love. It was the look of a mother toward her daughter. She put the cup down and took my hand. Her wrinkled skin touched my smooth skin. It was a symbol of the transition of generations and the legacy of values. "Thank you, child," Gogo said in a low voice. Her voice trembled with emotion. "Thank you for coming back that day. Thank you for choosing to help this smelly old woman. You could have run and saved your own life." I smiled gently with tears in my eyes. I firmly squeezed her hand. "Gogo, isn't that right?" I replied sweetly. "I am the one who should thank you. You saved me from a meaningless life. You gave me the strength to fight. You gave me a true home and a family that loves me for who I am." Gogo nodded and tears of happiness ran down her cheeks. "God is just Thandi. He took away my own grandson with a demon's heart, but he replaced him with a granddaughter with a heart of gold. You are my greatest legacy, Thandi. Not the company or the money in the bank, but you." I hugged Gogo tightly. In her arms, I felt a perfect peace. The dark past with Saifo and Mombatha felt like a nightmare that had passed a long time ago. Now I had woken up to a beautiful reality. I was free. Free from oppression, free from poverty, and free to be my true self. Justice had found its way, putting every person where they deserved to be. The villains were rotting in prison with eternal regret, and the patient protagonist now stood as a queen in her own palace, ready to embrace a bright future. The story of the old queen's charade had ended, replaced by the real story of true happiness. Now, before you go, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us what you would have done in Thandi's situation. Have you ever experienced family betrayal? How did you handle it? And most importantly, tell us where you're watching from so we can give you a shout out in our next video. If you loved this story, please hit that like button and smash that subscribe button because we post incredible true stories like this every single day. Turn on your notifications so you never miss an upload. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this powerful message about karma and justice. Remember, your story isn't over. Sometimes the best chapters come after the worst betrayals. Stay strong, stay blessed, and we'll see you in the next story. Much love from all of us. See you soon.